Thank you very much. Greetings. Can you hear my voice? Yes, you can. Let me just make a comment about today's discussion. Ashok mentioned that we'll try to analyze the article of the author, but first I propose having a regressive step with the following comment. There's a very interesting comment that we should be making. It's something very typical to humanitarian topics and subjects. In most scientific branches, there's narrowly trend to narrowly specialize. Whenever we speak about natural sciences or mathematical sciences, from the first perspective, we understand the following: the difficulty. Whenever we read humanitarian subjects, very often we read and we suppose that we understand what the author said. And in an essence, it was what we read. We assume that the author intended to say what we understood. Those who are from the humanities have been in this field during the last decade. They will surely understand this, that it seems that yes, it was very clear, very logical. After all, this is about experts. There are examples about policymakers, about science, the relationship between policymakers and science, and the American context. And of course, you know where the United States is on this map. We know the president, we watch the news. That means we understand everything. So we will read an article about the experts and understand everything. Whoever has went through these articles will understand what I mean. They make a reference link to an article published in the 1990s, where he has defined articles which are outdated, obsolete. 30 years have passed. A number of studies have taken place. Hundreds and not thousands of scientists have dug deep into this. So all the studies that thousands of scientists have done, now we have the context where we have the opportunity to consider each following article, research study that comes up from the given context. It is not enough merely to understand the language in which the article is written. It is not merely enough what is a state, who is an expert, what is science, etc. Behind each article, each study, there is the given subjective mentality of the given person, a living mentality. And connected with that mentality, the feelings, emotions, the senses. Senses are much stronger and more important than just the thoughts, especially in fields that are related to human beings. And understanding a text, understanding the author's intention means communicating with the author in order to understand from what context is the author speaking from. I can say the same thing from different perspectives to different target audience. Just as a verbal communication mean the words that are used, the vocabulary that is used, it can sound the exact same what I am saying but the intent could be totally different. Totally different intent. Therefore, the issue that I see is not about analyzing this article paragraph by paragraph, but I believe that we should outline the issues, outline the main points that the author will most probably be presenting the lecture, which I am not making, will be in the near future. Yes, it is like that, I'm told. So I would like to be speaking about just the concepts, ideas that are summarized in these two articles. And I would like to consider it not in the international context, because we don't have neither do we have the time, neither do we have the preparedness to do that. But today, I'd like to consider this in our own cultural context, in our reality. And I would clearly like to ask to the audience, those who are present, please do take notes, do make comments, do ask questions, because after this short presentation, there will be a Q&A session, both for me and for you. It will be more interesting if you take notes to exchange our ideas rather than just for me to say present a summary of the article. I have around 30 ideas and concepts I'd like to share with you. If I am able to share it within the range of time, it would be wonderful if you could select a few of these, especially those ideas around which you can share your own ideas. It would be wonderful if your ideas have some basis sounding, because after all, sharing the idea is nothing else than sharing your reasoning behind the given idea. So let us not waste time. And it was a bit long, of course, but let's move on to the concepts that I am looking forward to present to you today. Please. I will not be categorizing them, so please be forgiving. They are more, not random, I would say, but fragmented. Just small pieces, sections, like a mosaic puzzle, which we will later, maybe together, maybe separate, maybe one by one. We'll try to create the whole picture together. So, the first concept that I have selected, it is the issue of politicizing science. The author of the article, Shelley Hasanoff, the author of the article, makes such a comment that it is anti-scientific and anti-historical to say that science has been politicized only in the 21st century. The author probably here mentions the fact that the link between science and history has a long story.
Սակայն մյուս կողմից ընթերցողը հասկանում է, որ եթե շրջանառվել է այդ գաղափարը,
nevertheless, it is more than obvious that if this concept has been around, if people have presented this concept time to time and said that science has been politicized in the 20th century, that means there is something underlying. So this framework might be extreme. This concept can be faulty. Nevertheless, there must be something underlying. One of the concepts that we can discuss during our discussion. I hope that some of these will be interesting for you. and we'll have an effective discussion. The next concept is how we perceive science, perception of science, on behalf of the public.
Գիտության պատմությանը թեկուս մակերեսայնորեն ծանոթ մարդը անպայման
Those who are aware of the history of science, at least even if you know surface level, you can more than surely mention that during the course of history, there have been very different attitudes. You yourself, if you remember your childhood,
Ներս եթե հիշենք մեր մանկությունը, այդպես ավելի նուրբ է հնչում։ Կհիշենք, որ շատ հաճախ օգտագործում էինք մի արտահայտություն, ասում էինք գիտնականները ապացուցել են
I'm sure if you remember your childhood, there's this notion, the science have proven that. So there is this respect and trust towards science, correct? So throughout the course of years, many of us became scientists, became researchers. If I don't use the very respectable, reputable word scientists, at least researchers. And some of us understood that if there's a person around the world that doubts the results of science, that person is the person who yields the given result to find the answers. That is true in any given context, may it be abstract sciences, mathematics, all the way up to the humanities. And if we meet scientists who very truthfully is so sure about the legitimacy of the results, well, that's unfortunate. So we must mention that something just isn't it, because any healthy thinking person understands that any results that you have come up with is limited. Throughout the course of history, in science, there has always been a number of various approaches, and this attitude has been quite different. Some have considered science as something, the top level, trustworthy, and others have brought down the trustworthiness of science so down. So when we speak about experts, when we speak about politicizing science, we should always take this into account. I'm sure you noticed that these ideas, these notions that I am mentioning, these concepts will open up, will provide a source, the context where we'll be discussing the issue of the experts, the legitimacy of experts. The next topic. Not long ago, at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, I might also say, the process of science was that there was a problem, the scientist tackles this issue, tries to solve it. If they solve it correctly, they provide a solution to the public. If they do mistakes, then they come up with a theory, and then this theory is criticized by other scientists. In the modern world, the internal context of science is very different. There are a very narrow, limited number of issues that can be solved by individual scientists, may it be in social sciences, humanities, or natural sciences. Today, in order to solve these issues, we need groups of scientists, communication, laboratories, teams, and most importantly, time. Sometimes we expect everything from science and all at once. Scientists, doctors, physicists, chemists, give us a vaccine. It's not possible in 1 or 2 days. It might not even be possible in a few years, because the person who is in the center of scientific research, who is in this context, does understand very well how useless it can be to go to the extreme, to overestimate, to polarize science. I very smoothly moved on to the next topic. Before that, I was speaking about how the ways of scientific processes have changed. Now it's teams, consortiums of scientists that come up with this. Very often, even one team, one scientific group is not even enough. Very often scientists move from one laboratory to the other laboratory. There are different legal issues in different countries in conducting various experiments. So smoothly, we progress to the next topic, which very often are expectations. Our expectations from science is very often immediately, everything, and now. This cannot be far from being scientific. Surely in our personal communications, we might have the same expectations. Whenever if we are communicating with a person in a relationship, having the wrong expectation of the given person, our communication is doomed to failure. So the social expectation is based on the individual expectations, demands, requirements towards science, correct? So science, the society and science should more or less have a basic understanding about what science is, about the opportunities of science, about what is possible from science, and about what is not, in order for them to understand that this is what is possible and this is what is not. The next point. It's about the relationship of technology and science. We are more than sure that very often we are more than sure that in this very fast era of development of technology, science is developing at this rapid rate. So here we have these 2 points where I would like to pay attention to. The first one is the following, that while technologies are developing at a very fast rate, many of them consider this as an argument that science is trustworthy. This is what they think. If technology is created on the basis of science, and thanks to technologies, we have buildings, bridges, skyscrapers, the most difficult operations. That means that if the foundation is the science, then the consequences, the scientific consequences, conclusions are also good, are also truthful, and are also reliable. When we make bridges or we have a satellite, we are following scientific rules. When we're speaking about the Big Bang, the Great Explosion, then we're following the rule of physics, correct? These are just different mental processes that are taking place. And a layperson considers and thinks, just like I say, that if technology is working well, the rocket, the spaceship got where it should be. So that means the underlying scientific processes are real. If they are real, that means they are truthful. And if they say that space has come forth from the Big Bang, then it must be truthful. So we make this chain of events that we connect them with. And the second point related to about the relationship of science and technologies, which I'd like to mention, is the following, that the theoretical part of science and technologies are very often rarely intersect, if we can say so. There are certain sectors in science which just have nothing to do with productions technologies, equipment, and with other application of scientific theories. So what do we get at the end? So again, I will now very smoothly move on to the next topic. Then this is the following situation. Technology serves the purposes of life, the goals of life. Life, overall, is a much stronger factor than science, than technology, than any type of philosophy, any ideology, any institution. So back in the 19th century, philosophers would state this. They had a very interesting quotation on this, or something like this. I don't want to, of course, very roughly, that scientists often think, because we're speaking about science, that scientists very often think that life that is just in front of them, next to them, it's not the real life, because the person communicates with the essence of life, about the spirituality, about the God's existence, about knowing cognition around the world. So they would think that philosophy is above life, whereas we know that philosophy, science, and any branch of cultural branches are from life and are part of life. Therefore, they are under the influence of any factors of life. And the same way, technology and science. So technology serves the purposes of life. Life demands to be served, if I may say so. The same as the body, that we have a spirit and soul. The body demands your care. The soul demands nourishment, even life overall, even much more than this. It requires nourishment. So technology serves the issue of convenience of life. This is what technologies do. I don't want to go into all the issues. For example, the dominance of the ruling power. I won't go into politics, of course. Science serves the needs of technologies. And if you see what investment contribution is production doing for science, you will see that these directly, you will notice that these serve directly the needs of science. Allow me just to bring one example. It might sound a bit weird, this example, nevertheless. Maybe there is a company producer. For them, maybe it can be important for them to receive such a product that is lighter than the other mixture that they are using. So, and they will be announcing an competition, and for the competition, scientists will be participating, right? Because we know that only one scientist cannot solve this issue. So there will be groups of scientists. All of them will be trying to show that they have had great achievements in the field, that they have the potential to very quickly solve the issue that this producer has come up with. They take the financing, they take the responsibility to solve these issues. And then all of a sudden, if they are able to solve this issue, wonderful. If they are unable, nobody requires it from them. So if they do it, it's wonderful. If not, not. Because in order to solve technological issues, very often it's necessary to conduct fundamental scientific research in science. Okay? Yes. Therefore, very often in the scientific community, it is possible to convince or present the producer that in order to solve your solution, first you should finance, conducting fundamental scientific research in order for us to find out the best definition of the problem, because the issue that you have raised in your announcement is not scientific. This was just merely one example, just to show how science and technologies, how they are correlated. Of course, it's just one of them. And of course, it would be very naive to say that after this, technology and science are going to communicate in this way. No, it's not something set in stone, because every sector, every sphere has its own peculiarities. There are certain sectors, they might need special approaches. There are certain sectors with the potential that ensure the continuity of the given sphere. For example, science studies. Science studies in various countries, on behalf of the governments of various countries, they're financed by various governments. The same with humanitarian studies. I will share an experience based on my own experience, a story. I was talking with the provost of Heidelberg University, and I said, how are you maintaining the classical philology department? How do you maintain interest towards that? He said, from the other more profitable departments, we take the profit, we contributed in this department, and we ensure that the applicants to this department are promising students. We ensure that the financing that we take from other departments and we invest here, we make sure that it is well used. He said, not many are interested in classical philology. Most of them, they come in aristocratic high-class families, or those who have a history related to this subject. So we're trying to keep it alive. So there are subjects, may it be humanities that or natural sciences, that take the willful desire of certain persons to be financed consciously, even though they do not have financial good results. The next notion where we're speaking about different time frames about politicizing science. When in the mid-20th century, there was the Cold War, military rivalry, competition, various countries were trying to create more and more powerful armaments. Does this assume scientific politicizing science? When science is truthfully trying to fulfill the order of the state, is this politicizing science? Or are they referring to something else? I'm more than sure that they mean something else, especially the fact that there's a time, and the time has truly come, when politicizing penetrates into science. Politicizing politics cannot directly penetrate. It penetrates via different ideologies. The ideologies look scientific. So when you say politicizing science, we mean politics intervening into science, not that science takes on the function of politics. Such discussions have occurred from on the level of scientists, scientific communities, a given scientific community, representatives of this or that group, etc. And finally, allow us to mention a few points about experts. Reading these articles and some other articles as well, we will truly notice that the concept of an expert, it's not one. There are different authors. When they say experts, they understand different notions. Just like in political science, when we say democracy, people have different different definitions. Recently, there was a scientist, researcher that had underpinned 20 very different definitions of democracies, and very serious, a well-known scientist. Can you imagine? In mathematics, if you all of a sudden come up with such a notion, a real number, when you say real number, and all of us have different concepts of what a real number is, and not taking into account that there's Strauss theory and the Dickens theory. They are different definitions of what a real number is, but it's the same real number after all. So there are different concepts of an expert, and two of these are very interesting, based on which I would like us to pay attention to. One of them is the following, that when we an expert is considered as a decision maker in a vague situation. An expert is a person who should have a standpoint in such a context where there is no certainty. Because the institution of experts, that is why it is created. That it seems like that's why experts are there, for them to give direction when there is no sense of direction. And second, when we say an expert, very often people assume lack of corruption. So there is science, but there should also be experts. And from this perspective, our author has done a very interesting consideration to understand that why the notion of consent censorship, why was this initiated by the US government in the mid-20th centuries, and what was the reasoning behind it? The reasoning was the following, that the state, the authority, the government throughout the course of their activities sometimes are based on such information that all of a sudden they find out that it was not good information. It was disinformation, misinformation, it was false, not truthful. And in order for the state to be sure that they're on the safe side, they create the institution of censorship. Because they assume that the institute of censorship, the experts, they are objective, not corrupt persons who can provide an objective perspective on this or that topic, because experts are not limited to one or two sectors or spheres. There are many interdisciplinary subjects. It is assumed that experts should be aware, should be able to cover all this. Sometimes the English words come faster than the Armenians. Sometimes they should cover this area. So there's a very interesting concept here, based on which I'd like to pay attention to, and that's the following, that a system created by one state, one government, very often is copied by other states. They knew why they created it.
Մյուսները վերցնում են,
Others take it
ուրեմն տեղեկ չունելով պատճառներից, ավելին դեռ
without being aware of the reasons.
զարգացման զարգացման մեջ որոշակի հարցեր լուծելու համար ներդրված ինստիտուտը հետո կտրվել է իր հիմնական խնդրից ու արմատներից։
Sometimes even there's the case where an institution that was created for a certain purpose diverges towards a totally different path, created for reason A, but going towards B. This is a very interesting concept where we should regularly speak about this when we speak about scientific institutions, institutes, about the relationship between science and policy. Because if we continue like this, sooner or later, a scientific institute one day will become very individual. And this is where the game starts between the two camps. And here, I will clearly move on to the next topic. What Jasanoff was saying, that today it is more than possible that science and politics have already defined the rules of the game of their own relationships. The experts of the given sphere sector clearly states that these two communities, camps, poles, I can't find the best word, these are so independent that they clearly are posed with the issue of coexistence. And they say, come on, let's put the rules, let's set the rules of the games. You don't create obstacles for us, we won't create obstacles for you. To be as frank as possible. Regarding this institute of experts, we spoke about censorship. The abstract definition is that censorship is considered as an auditing body or auditing methodology. You know what is an audit? The purpose of audit is to supervise, to control, to ensure that quality is the best. May it be on an abstract level. So censorship in one way or the other serves the function of auditing. But in political processes and in life, the function of these institutes are much wider, diverse, and multi-layered, especially if we take into account the concept raised a few minutes ago that science, institute of experts, all of these have become independent bodies and they can themselves dictate the rules of the game. Here we must mention that regardless of the fact that how independent science becomes, it is always less than the political independence of the political powers and bodies. If not theoretically, then at least practically out of 100, if we speak about science and politics, science and authorities, when they are encountering one another, I can say intuitively that in 95% of the cases, the authorities have been the winning side and the other 5 cases have been a consensus. Why? Because I might say, I will repeat what I just said. Life is much wider and stronger than each element of life, taken separately. I don't know how interesting these concepts are for you. If I still have time.
մի երկու բան էլ ասեմ, եթե չի անցնենք քննարկման։ Շատ լավ, այդ դեպքում ես մի բան ասեմ, ուրեմն ընդհանրապես մի բան, վերջին գաղափարը
Just the last concept,
այսօր այստեղ գալիս
which I was thinking about on the way. I just took some notes.
հասկանալի ձևով նախև առաջին համար ձևակերպել, որովհետև դեռ
Let me define it. I have not even prepared a definition. It doesn't have the outfit of with words. I have not framed it in words. The question is the following: as just laypersons, citizens, how can we ensure that we are not victims of the ignorance of experts? I apologize to the experts
որ այսպեսի բան եմ ասում,
for me saying this.
էլ ավելի վատ բաներ են ասում, բայց փորձը ցույց է տալիս, որ
Sometimes they themselves say even worse things towards one another, but it is more than proven that a certain number of areas in life, education, now we're in this sphere, when this is entrusted to the experts, very often we do not see development. On the contrary, we see regression.
ինչ անել,
What should be done?
էքսպերտը չի կարող
Experts cannot, especially
բնագիտական հարցերի վերաբերյալ հասարակությանը սպառիչ ձևով տրամադրել տեղեկատվություն։
an expert is unable to provide a full answer to the society. Why? Because the society is not fully ready. In order to understand the answer fully, you yourself should be scientist. So the expert should
Բարձունակացնել,
simplify,
երբ որ իր խոսքը ուղղված է հանրությանը։
should simplify his perspectives when presenting it to the public.
Հանրության կրթական մակարդակի բարձրացմանը զուգահեռ կբացվեն
I believe the following, that in order to raise
հնարավորություններ, որ
while raising the overall education level of the society, new doors, opportunities for communication will open. The more educated the society is,
եւ այնքան
they will understand the perception of the expert much better. They will be able to raise better questions, and the probability that
էքսպերտը մանիպուլյացիաներ
the expert will manipulate this or that
քիչ են։
becomes less.
Իրականությունը, որ էքսպերտը
The probability that the expert
անելիս այդ կոմունիկացիայի ընթացքում
during the communication
ոչ կոմպետենտությունը
will show that he or she is incompetent, it's much higher if the society is better educated. And the probability also changes that this expert will have stimuli to improve himself or herself.
որովհետև մենք
Why? Because we know that nowadays around the world,
քանի ամիս բաց ես թողնում քո մասնագիտական ոլորտի նորությունները,
if you lose the pulse of your professional development for a few months, you might not even be able to catch up later. For example, the pianists, if they practice for one day, I feel I play bad. If one day I don't practice, I notice I'm playing bad. If I don't practice for 2 days, my colleagues notice how bad I'm preparing bad. But if I don't play for 3 days, then the audience notice how bad I have prepared. I'm jumping from one topic to the other, just trying to present the bits and pieces of the notes I had taken. Some of them I believe I was able to explain, some of them I wasn't, but I hope that during the discussion, we'll have the opportunity to clarify while we are interacting with one another. Please, Mr. Madoyan, please. Mr. Madoyan, thank you